participation. So really appreciate that that you can all join. And yeah, this is our sort of we've had a couple of webinars on SPARC matters, and this is one on the Innovation Research Facility, and a chance to introduce you to Chloe. So I'm going to hand it over to John to do the introductions and to welcome us all in. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Chloe. Chloe, many of you know Chloe, but she's taking over the reins of the Innovation Research Facility for SPARC from Christabel, who was working on this for the first year or so. And it's great because Chloe obviously brings a deep background in pastoral livelihoods, market systems development, among other sectors, especially in the Horn, along with extensive networks. So we know that she'll bring a lot of good ideas to be able to get this from a kind of a conception phase moving into actual kind of field research. And I think the point of today really was, just to lay out the initial ideas, what we've been finding, to get some feedback from this group. So Chloe, over to you.
Awesome, thank you both. And I'm really excited to be back working with SPARC. It's a really exciting program, and it's been fun to get my head around the Innovation Research Facility. And I'm looking forward to all of your feedback, and happy to connect one-on-one outside of this as well, as we refine and crystallize the work. So today, at the end of the presentation, we're going to come back to these questions. So I just wanted to pose them as we get started to keep in mind. So we circulated the white paper. The white paper has been shared with a limited group at FCDO, but will be shared with a much wider group in August. And so in preparation for that, and as we refine our thinking more, we would love to get your critiques and be brutal, blunt, your critiques of the white paper if you have had a chance to read it, or if you have a chance to read it later on. And in particular, I'm really curious which parts of the paper, what's presented there, you see really fit very well with SPARC's specific priorities and comparative advantage as a research program in relation to other projects that many of you may also be working on. And then we are planning to continually update the white paper on an annual basis. And so we'll be collecting thoughts, feedback, and also refining the innovation frameworks to make them more and more specific to our context throughout the life of the program, and updating the white paper annually. So if there are key things you think right now we know about, we haven't captured well in the paper, and you would like us to include them in the next beginning of 2022 iteration, it would be great to get those thoughts, and we can start integrating them now. The second area for discussion is around the innovation framework itself. You'll have seen it focus very strongly on the private sector and on technology innovation. And so it would be great to have a discussion around to what extent we think that the innovation facility portion of SPARC should stay within that realm, or if it should expand, and if so, what ways, and how it works in relation to the working groups and other SPARC interventions. And so thinking about the purpose of the innovation research facility itself. And some of the questions there are, should we expand further beyond the direct value chain framework that's now in the white paper, looking more deeply at innovation in governance or innovation in community management of different resources or community decision-making processes that have been shifting either donor-driven or independently of that. And also how we might better integrate digging deeper into pastoralist systems to classify innovation that isn't externally driven. And then the third area, which is the most exciting, I think, is selecting the actual projects and partners that we want to focus research on at this first round of pieces of research. And so I will present the shortlist that came out of the white paper and a couple research concepts that were developed, as well as some new ideas that have evolved since then. And I'm keen to get your thoughts on whether we should stick to evaluative research as it's framed, which is innovations that have been designed, implemented, and we can research some impact and make recommendations for scaling or replication, or if we should expand that to also think about more exploratory research. And this is particularly in response to demand from private sector partners and government partners who are more interested in developing new innovation through research than looking back at the impact of research, or back at the impact of innovations that are already implemented. And then on a very tangible note, if there are innovation partners you think were not captured that definitely should be included here, that has come up through any of your work, we'd love to get that input. And continue to think about an easy way that we can feed in additional ideas that come up from other working streams of SPARC as we move forward. So a little recap of the Innovation Research Facility. The overall theory of change here is that if the evidence is co-created, curated, and brokered on which innovations are most relevant, impactful, and scalable, and what policies enable success of these innovations, then future programs and policies can be designed for to more effectively utilize innovation. So here the focus really is on the evidence, on the evaluatory research. The results framework for the facility, we've been busy, Christabel and Carmen primarily, conducting secondary research and some primary research with innovators to do this white paper study. It was wrapped up around February this year, and also shared at the Global Landscape Forum. And then we have this prioritized list of activities or prioritized list of projects that we want to finalize and to select. So the white paper itself looks at defining innovation, what is innovation, and really focusing here on the development of new solutions or the evolution of existing solutions, but those that have already experienced innovation. And we can look at the impact and the process that innovation took place. When thinking about who is innovating, it included a wide range of stakeholders, NGOs, businesses, social enterprises, research institutions, some local populations. Government was entirely represented at any scale in this initial draft of the white paper. And what innovations are the innovations that cut across the value chain? And so the paper really focuses on supply chain innovations, whether on customer acquisition, distribution, or product innovations, or digital technology, and then try to take a gender lens as well when possible. So these are the main findings from the scoping. There was over 47 innovations that were assessed and then classified into this kind of framework. So in the product and service innovation area, there was a good number in access to finance, primarily around insurance, much less so captured in terms of savings or payment services. There were access to markets innovations, whether something like Mufugo Trade that is linking market information, prices, and traders together in Kenya, or supporting of trader membership organizations to automate their trading interactions. And then there was access to information, different technology solutions that were sharing information with pastoralists based on various different technical solutions. In process innovation, there were a number of innovations in asset management, helping pastoralists, agropastoralists to manage land and water in some cases, sometimes in an integrated way, sometimes focusing on one asset, and also product management solutions. And then in the third area, there's business model innovation, where a number of solutions around value addition were identified. This is really around processing of milk, and innovations around bundling services to help make different products and services available in one point of sale. And some work was done as well to capture innovation from research and knowledge management. The white paper and these innovations that were captured were primarily driven by the donor community and NGOs. So you see in this bottom chart the distribution there. And then the second category being driven by the private sector, or again, donor supported social enterprises. So a conversation that we've started to have is how we can expand this to look at some of the categories that weren't as well represented and may be equally of interest. The findings from in the white paper as well show that Kenya and Ethiopia host the majority of the tech innovations, and much less innovation was captured for the Sahel. So the preliminary insights that came out in the paper were drawn out of what we are hearing from each of these different innovators. So in new business models, there were a number of different solutions for tech-driven microinsurance projects to use various types of satellite imagery. There were as innovative business models around bundling of products. A good example here, I think many people were on the Darisha call, is around IBLI experimenting with bundling insurance with different products. And then community inclusion currencies were also identified through grassroots economics. So this is looking at using a community currency to keep wealth in a smaller area and promote local economic development. In looking at enabling policy practices, it seemed like across the different countries, there's not a lot of strong regulation that prevented financial service innovation. Innovators have been able to lobby for and maintain the space to roll out new products. So a relatively open financial regulatory environment. And that there is this continued commitment from governments on building resilience of vulnerable communities. However, there also came out in the literature quite a lot around the mental models of government policies, whether they're national government policies or donor policies, around whether or not how to approach pastoralism. So pastoralism is often framed as highly risky, difficult to access, very rural, very poor. And in that framing of pastoralist communities as vulnerable and marginalized, we may miss opportunities for policies that could start with acknowledging what assets pastoralists have, what inbuilt resilience strategies pastoralists have, and building on those. The third area is the partnership models. And so there were different examples of partnerships between government and private sector, specifically as a scaling agent. And there were also partnership models between local communities and NGOs, where NGOs really used various local community mechanisms to share information, whether through word of mouth or working with thought leaders in communities, and how that partnership has evolved in different areas. And the next research focus area was effective distribution channels. So the technology solutions that have been mapped here show a variety of different mechanisms, but primarily it's pretty low tech. Use of radio, of USSD are the most prevalent technology solutions that we are seeing in use now. And a lot of recognition from many publications and interviews that there is an increasing penetration of affordable smartphones. There's a lot more that can be done there, but that there are various barriers to use, barriers to paying for data, which come up and make that tool not as useful as it might seem. There's been some discussion about including behavioral insights, but nothing came up through the scoping of what's happening currently in the innovation landscape. And we've had more recent conversations which are not captured in this draft of the white paper, including agropastoral innovation, beyond innovation that's driven from agropastoral systems rather than from tech solutions. And I'll speak about some of those examples a bit more later. So the majority of the tech innovations that were mapped in the white paper are focused on the shocks and stresses. So I believe many of us are familiar with this sort of iceberg approach. So about in the top part of the triangle, you have what's most visible, and this is the shocks, the stresses. We all know very well about the fundraising aspects that come along with shocks and stresses, access to resources for governments and communities, and then there's resources available to do innovation in this very visible space. Much less visible, less tangible, you have also less innovation that was identified, whether it's around behaviors and patterns or around changing structures, and nothing here in the mental models. So this is what Christabel would speak about as how can we shift looking at pastoralists as in vulnerable conflict zones and trying to solve those risks, but instead start from a discussion of what assets do pastoralists have and how can innovation be driven or spurred from that position. So overall, the key findings of the paper is that the majority of innovations that exist focus on providing extension services and information about markets. So it's really from the innovator to the pastoralist as a recipient of that information. Within financial services, there's a heavy focus on insurance over other sort of financial services in what we have mapped so far. And also the key elements of a successful business model for tech innovation have been synthesized as having partnerships, working with government to reach scale, bundling of products and services, and designing for nomadic lifestyle of pastoralists. So moving, just before we move to the next section, if anyone has any clarification question about the white paper, before we get into more of specific project and discussion critique, just clarification questions on the white paper process or findings at this time. Awesome, Christabel and Carmen nailed it. I think it's very clear. So we move to the discussion of the project selection. So how is the Innovation Research Facility, how is it structured? So it's going to conduct primary and secondary research with partners, and this piece of doing it with innovation partners is very central to the way it's been conceived. Also to curate dialogue and debates with key stakeholders, and to provide technical assistance to FCDO investees in thinking about innovation. So from this part of SPARC, the Innovation Facility is not thinking to fund any implementation or pilot, although sometimes we've danced around discussing if action research would be an appropriate focus. It's also not, it's definitely not funding any capital expenses, even if it was to look in that area. it wouldn't be doing direct policy and advocacy or research on early innovations that haven't proved themselves. The criteria that was used to select this short list of this short list of projects that I'm about to share is around these 5 areas. So one is the alignment with SPARC as a program objective and the potential for impact. The second is this proof of concept, evaluative nature. The third is a gender lens. The fourth is the strong partnership, that really we would be researching together with an innovation partner who could then put some of those recommendations to practice, as well as the research outcome being able to be shared with FCDO and others. And then that overall we want to balance portfolio diversity. And since this partner aspect is really central to the way we are thinking about it, we had some additional criteria for thinking about who is a valid partner to work on this research with. So the partner should be strategically aligned with the overall mission. So as an organization, they should be bought into what we're trying to achieve. There should be alignment with the facilities learning agenda. They should also be willing to partner, and this one heavily influenced the recommendations for this first round, especially as we wanted to move a bit faster, and so work with partners who had a quick buy-in, their ability to partner, that they really have the time and space, and the degree to which the partner is being innovative, the relevance of innovation, whether it's the business model or the product and its potential for scale and impact. We also consider how innovative it is compared to their own competitors within the space. And if it's not already a commercial innovation, thinking about if it's possible to fund through any resource other than public funding and potential for commercialization. So here's the recommended portfolio of 9 that came out of the 47 that were scoped and was based on these selection criteria. I think Carmen answered your question, Steve, but we can come back to it if not. So the evaluative research were in 3 different types: innovations that have reached a significant scale, innovations that have shown significant impact, and innovations that are cutting edge. And then within this more exploratory area, it was innovations that are already cutting edge and would have capacity to benefit from additional R&D, essentially what is R&D support, and innovations tackling the challenge of last mile delivery. From these, using primarily this criteria of a partner who's really willing and has capacity to work with us immediately to get things started, we prioritized 2, which are in this 2 types, which are in this bottom left-hand corner. One is around IBLI, so looking at a piece of research together with ILRI, and another piece of research with insurance partners. And then a second is around AfriScout and Modem, which are similar apps in the 2 different regions. Then beyond the white paper, some ideas that have come up and we may even throw in to consider for these first research are from different areas. So one is from thinking about how decisions are made with complex sets of information, and there's an innovation that has been developed and is hosted in eCRAF called Shared, which is a decision-making process including satellite data, different research data sets that are publicly available, community source data, and is a process that supports local governments to make integrated decisions, considering a wide variety of factors. It was piloted I think 5 or 6 years ago, in Turkana and has been replicated in other pastoralist counties in Kenya and other countries in the Sahel and Southern Africa, which would be outside of our scope. Another area which is looking at financial services that are less digitally hosted is the wide prevalence of savings groups in different forms throughout pastoralist regions, and looking at what has been sustained by these. And so there's popularly known ones like BRAC has started from Bangladesh, has started in Ethiopia. BOMA is a large one in Kenya, and there are various savings groups that have been established at scale as add-ons to safety net programs in Ethiopia and Kenya as well. Some additional ideas around pastoralist system change is that we see increasing amount of paid grazing in Kenya, not by herders, but by traders, small and large, who buy animals and have realized that if they have the financial capacity, they can make much better returns keeping the animals longer. Not exactly fattening, but perhaps we could call it finishing. And looking at how that is impacting resilience of the pastoralist system overall, if it's something worth promoting or if it's creating more challenges than benefits. Within pastoralist systems as well, we see increasing numbers of elite pastoralist investors. So people primarily of pastoralist backgrounds who are no longer in production in any new way, but are financing not only family members, but other herds and new practices to be adopted as a business investment. And so seeing how that is shifting pastoralism, more traditional pastoralism in terms of financing decision-making. And another trend that we're observing in pastoralist zones are camel milk farms. So rising number of camel herds that are in farms and supply wealthier consumers in urban areas of Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and have started to bundle different services. So initially, these farms tended to always start as a wealthy individual who bought a large number of camels and had visitors come to drink fresh camel milk. Now some of them are diversifying with their brand to packaging or selling in further away areas. Others are becoming the pastoralist equivalent of a wellness retreat with lodging, and people can come and stay, drink fresh milk, and growing popularity. That way, a more famous one for people who know outside of Grisa. Others are starting to experiment because their demand has been so high with also buying from pastoralist herds to have large volumes of milk available for sale, especially in Puntland. That model has been adopted. So there could be an opportunity to look at these kind of emerging trends in pastoralist systems, how they're impacting resilience of pastoralists, and if it makes sense to support them with development funding or public funding as well. And then another area which the paper doesn't focus as much on is failure. So a big part of innovation is failure. And so I have this sort of question for us to muse about of, is it worth documenting in detail where we see a pattern of failures? So there's been a lot of investment over decades now in establishing hides and skin processing facilities in pastoralist areas that never take off. Do we want to scope all of these examples and document why they have all failed, to either inform how to do it well or to make a clear decision that the kind of model that's being promoted probably will never work for a variety of reasons. And there are other examples. I'm sure people on this call have many ones to throw in around failure, but is that something that is interesting to us as well? So now moving into my favorite part, which is to hear from all of you and to discuss a bit more about this paper. So if we could start in this category of critiques of the white paper itself. So looking at this white paper, keeping in mind that we're going to improve it, new version annually. What are your thoughts, your critiques that we can incorporate into this process?
Steve, I see you have your hand up. You're on the video. Yeah, go ahead. And for everybody else, you can type 5 in the chat box, but or you can put it up on video and we'll try and see it. Go ahead, Steve.
It's great to see you, Steve.
Hi. Chloe, the team there has done a really good job of documenting a particular kind of innovation. Now, I think we should be casting innovation in a very broad sense. We shouldn't narrow down until we can decide why we're narrowing down. What we're looking at the moment, as you've alluded to quite rightly in your presentation, this is innovation where well-meaning people are trying to do things for other people who are less powerful, less rich, etc., etc. Yes? So there's a whole anthropology of the creation of innovations in here. I would like to balance that, in my ideal world, I'd love somebody to have gone to talk to half a dozen groups of pastoralists somewhere in the immense territory that SPARC is meant to cover, and have a conversation with pastoralists which says something like this: go back 20, 30 years in your life and tell me everything that's changed that matters to you in your life, and how has that change happened? Yep. Because I think we will probably find, if we talk to people about what's different about life today compared with life in 1995 or 1990, that there will be innovations that have happened, yes? And those innovations will come in many different shades. Some of them will be physical products, like I've got a mobile phone today, and some will be considerably more mundane. The local government round here finally got a primary school that I can actually send my kids to, and they actually learn something, yes? And that's the sort of thing that doesn't tend to get written up in glossy folders. So I'd love us to broaden our appreciation of innovation, and not to look at it so much as the way that we well-meaning outsiders project our ideas of what might make life better to pastoralists, but complement that by having conversations with pastoralists about what they think has made their life better, so that we have a bottom-up perspective on what kind of innovations make a difference to people's lives. Yes? Now, I have several other things I want to talk about, and they're all, I'm afraid, 5-minute semi-speeches like the last one. So I'll just leave that one out and other people can get stuck in.
I think for me, a couple questions pop up in regards to that. And my instinct is also that we need to expand this going forward. But that we started somewhere and it was done, this subset of innovation was done in quite some detail, which is a really helpful way to start, and also to get to some research to do this year. But the questions around that, I mean, one I saw that John raised is, what wouldn't be innovation if it's just about change? And a second question that I have about it is, for absolutely those changes, like a new school, are transformational for pastoralist lives. Is that a piece of research to be done within the SPARC research facility, or does that belong in one of the other working groups as a set of research questions to explore? Sorry, I said transformational.
Yeah, sorry, Chloe. You might as well have poked me with a sharp stick. No, Chloe, the reason I react to that is I do quite a lot of studies of medium-term change over 50, 60 years in development. And every time I do stories of medium-term change, how did New Zealand become a rich country? That's a long-term study. How do women in Thailand live a different life today to the way that they lived in the 1960s? That's a medium-term story. Yeah. And in all of those, you don't see these whiz-bang transformations. In debates on Africa, we always get this T word out as though if we can't change Africa in 5 years, we've somehow failed. And Asia is a miracle. There are no miracles in Asia. Asia just began doing the right things 40 years ago. They did commoner garden things and they stuck at it for 40 years. And the result is pretty amazing. But there are no miracles. It was common sense, marginal gains, year in, year out for 40 years. And in the case of New Zealand, by the way, it's 140 years, not just 40 years. So sorry, that's why I get excited when somebody uses the T word, because I had somebody criticize a paper I wrote a month ago, which was about innovations. And I talked about farmers changing seed varieties and buying a hybrid cow. And somebody jumped all over me and said, "You don't understand what innovation is. Buying a hybrid cow is not an innovation." Well, it bloody well is. You're changing the way that you go farming and it creates additional wealth, new practices, new skills and so on. But this person wasn't having it, yeah? If it wasn't out of a big shiny box made by Samsung and something like that, it wasn't an innovation for this person. So sorry, that's... So
no, I think
yeah.
it's useful, and our Somali colleagues often say during innovation challenges that just being able to deliver something in Somalia, it takes a high level of innovation given the changing operational context. So like depending on the specific scenario, innovation could look very different. So I think that point's well taken. I am curious, however, how you see, because SPARC has many pieces that are asking important questions, how you would see the innovation research facilities subset of these important questions in relation to the other interventions in SPARC.
Well, Chloe, can I make the second of the points on my scratch pad? Now,
only if you answer my question.
Well,
no problem. We can come back to it. Maybe others have thoughts as well.
It's about the criteria being applied. You know, you asked what the innovation facility should be using, and in your slides there, you have lots and lots of very good criteria. Yes, but the criteria I couldn't see was the one about SPARC's added value. So let me just give you an example here. ILRI is doing all of this really careful and interesting work about piloting forms of livestock insurance, yes? And my reaction to that is, that's great, fine, we need to know about that, but is that SPARC's role? ILRI is a formal institution that knows all about developing an innovation, propagating an innovation, checking whether it's working, evaluating the results. It doesn't really need us in SPARC to do this. I think our added value is looking for those things that aren't on the public radar, that aren't products of ILRI, things that are reasonably well known because they're already out there. I mean, I think we should have a role in monitoring those things, and we should do secondary literature reviews every now and again on things like index-based insurance. I mean, I've just done this myself this year, looking through the literature on index-based insurance and reading through, you know, a dozen papers and trying to extract the juices of it. But that's something you do pretty quickly, you know, that's not hard work. What I would love us to get to are those innovations that only the local people know about because it's this community group there, or it's some NGO that doesn't have itself in lights, doesn't have an international presence and so on. But I think it's a criterion we have to do. We have to ask ourselves, what is our role? Or are we going to be an evaluation facility for established NGOs, established international organizations and so on, which is a perfectly honorable role. But if we're going to do that, we need to recognize that that's what our role is. And by the way, if we go down that role of being a provider of innovation services, quit methodologies, double-blind evaluations. Do you know what a double-blind evaluation is? Nobody knows what they're evaluating. It's a wonderful way of, it's a wonderfully intriguing way of evaluating. But no, I think we have to ask ourselves, are we replicating the work that an ILRI should be doing in some respects? ILRI and all the other well-established agencies that know all about evaluation and so on. And can we get ourselves to a point where we are uncovering things that most people don't know about? So I had a big thing in the chat box about proof of concept, because I think that an awful lot of the things we should be, I'd like to have on our radar are all kinds of things where you say, well, there's no bloody proof of context. This is some people who are breaking out into new ground, stumbling about in some cases, driven forward with energy in other cases. And that's the kind of thing where we'd love to get in and say, we want to talk to you about what you're doing and how's it going and so on. And do you have a story that we can tell to other people similar to you in other parts of the drylands? Yeah. So I was slightly alarmed when this "we're not going to go" proof of concept appeared. Hence the illiterate notes in the margin.
Yeah, no, I think this is really well taken and has come up a number of times. Of initially, the facility was framed as an evaluative facility, but that there is a lot of interesting work that could be done around these emerging innovations, especially those that are less well funded or less visible already. And maybe that's something we want to include in future years, or even prioritize. So I think it's really well taken. I noticed also the number 5 from Mark.
Thanks very much, Chloe, and thanks, Steve, for those important comments. I don't really have a question, but I wanted to draw some attention to a couple of things that have appeared in the innovation work that you've done. And congratulations, by the way, to you, to Carmen, Christabel before as well. I think you've raised some really good questions around a really sticky subject. I think the biggest challenge we have as a program is being comfortable with what the limit is of what we look at. And so that's just, that's a point that we're talking around, and I think we are getting moving forward. But I wanted to draw attention to two things, and these are more comments, not really questions, but I'd be really interested in hearing people's views on this. The first of which is something that I think really will influence what direction we go in. And I like the way you presented it, Chloe, and we had talked about this earlier. It's this kind of healthy tension between the evaluative element of the research that we do, looking, as you had put it earlier in a call we had, looking backwards at what is there, part of which is addressed by this research, and then the exploratory element of research. Is there something we should be doing to help further and push forward an innovation? Leaving it at that. So I find that an interesting point, and I'm curious to see what people think about that, because if it is evaluative, we will have a very different type of method than if it's exploratory work. And I think this is really a key point. And the other point, the other asterisk I'll put on the evaluative bit is, in my experience, a lot of partners we might want to work with around evaluative research will be like, no, don't waste our time evaluating what we're doing. We know what we're doing. Like it can be quite difficult to do. And the second point I'd like to make is something, just drawing a thread here between the innovation white paper and the gender scoping study, both of which really struggle to find stuff that was happening broadly speaking, in West Africa and the Sahel. And there may be a language issue there, but or it just may be the visibility thing, fewer glossy pamphlets in the west of Africa versus the east of Africa. You see Kenya pop up with, 15 innovations. Okay, well, we know that Kenya has been a development darling for decades. And so there's been a lot of investment in those kinds of things. It's more a point of interest. I don't think there's anything we can necessarily do about that, but it does require us to be critical in what's coming through the literature, what's available on websites versus where we need to really probe more deeply to find the stuff that's not in a glossy pamphlet. Just a point. I think we all know that, but just it was an identical challenge in looking at what was happening in sort of the gender world around SPARC issues. So just 2 points there. But maybe more salient would be the exploratory versus evaluative piece, which I think is kind of an important one for us.
Yeah, I think this one is exploratory versus value forward versus backward is a really interesting question and does really affect what we prioritize. And absolutely my experience as well as that the partners we want to work with are much more interested in looking forward. And I think Todd's point in the chat as well is helpful in this regard is if we talk about looking at the effects of different innovations, I think it could also open up looking forward and backwards as well as looking at success as failure. I think what becomes challenging there is that right now the white paper is really framed in this language of documenting innovation with potential for scale or replication, things that can get bigger faster and quickly, and moving to that more like the edge of innovation might mean that we support something, research something to make the recommendation that it stops. And so that outcome of make a recommendation that it scales wouldn't be there. I think it's still valuable work to be done, but we would need to be comfortable with that as an outcome if we take that direction. I see Carmen also raised her hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. No, similar to what you just said. I mean, I think I'm happy to hear this conversation around exploratory versus evaluative. In general, that research around exploratory, though, is often covered by other institutions, whether they be research or even within NGOs, et cetera, unless you're getting into those true grassroots organizations that may not be on anyone's radar, might be much more sort of independent. One of the cases for doing proof of working with innovations that have already demonstrated proof of concept and moving forward is that often innovation struggles to scale because of the lack of that evidence base on the challenges of scaling. They often there's a certain type of evidence that is necessary to either crowd in different types of philanthropic funding or even private sector investments. Again, both Christabel and I came from a strong private sector perspective and recognizing that there is innovation outside of that space. But I think this tension of scale, we really, for me, SPARC needs to say, are we doing research to, even if you're looking at grassroots organizations that may work at a scale and may be replicated other ways, so that we're documenting that so it can be replicated versus an innovation itself. That one thing is able to go to scale at, within just one institution, taking it to scale. So just sort of throwing that out there to add to the thinking. I'll admit, a little indifferent on which way it goes. But in general, that's kind of some of the original discussions that had happened. And unfortunately, I've got some people here to do some work on the house, so I'm gonna go on mute and off video.
Thanks, Carmen. It's really helpful to know where this thread came from. I'm just looking through the chat now. Maury, Mary Ellen, do you want to chime in and elaborate either of your comments?
Hello, it's Maury here.
Sorry, yeah,
Oh, Mary, right.
No.
I heard Mary.
Mary.
I heard Mary.
Mary, go ahead, please. Please go. I'm sure that you will say something more intelligent than I, so go ahead.
No, I was just reacting to the thing about there being, lack of or apparently lack of innovation in West Africa. Just saying, I do think it's a language thing, yeah, because so much it's only going to get onto that international agenda probably if it's written in English, and not everything is written in English, and not everything is written up. I think in terms of innovation in general, not talking about this sort of innovation, but innovation even in just how NGOs work. I can remember, one particular way that NGOs were doing something in water aid. It was just starting in Francophone West Africa, and it was on phase 2 of the methodology in the Anglophone countries within one organization. So there's a sort of gap, but there's also a lag as well. I think the other thing is that when you actually look, just to go back to what Steve was saying and to underscore that, I put down ZAI, which is planting holes, and planting holes in West Africa, which was 30 years ago what we were promoting as an innovation. I recently saw a post that talked about using them in East Africa, where they're being promoted as climate smart agriculture. Yeah, so innovation, in that definition of innovation, in a way it depends where you're standing as well. And then I think, again, just to underline another comment from Steve about, what I find really interesting, what is really interesting is what are people actually doing, yeah? And that's how farmer managed natural regeneration was sort of, there was a SPARC was planted, but nobody realized what was happening in Niger. And then it was years later when people looked at satellite images and realized there were 5 million hectares of reforested farmland through farmer managed natural regeneration. And then, that got us to, that then sparked off the research and the scaling up outside of Niger, yeah, to some extent. So I think there are many, many examples of that sort of innovation by farmers, and I'm sure by herders as well, that it would, particularly in the context, I think, of conflict, people must be changing how they, herders must be changing. They must be using WhatsApp in ways we can't even imagine. They must be developing, as you say, ways of doing trade or ways of getting information. I mean, if we're putting local radio down as an innovation, right, yeah, that's been around nearly 30 years as well in West Africa. So it's like, it's not the radio that's the innovation, it's how you're using it. And I think the same for seed, the same for, I mean, I noticed nothing about vaccinations, there's nothing about livestock breeding, there's nothing about, market products. So there's all sorts of areas where pastoralists could be innovating, and it would be quite a shame if in choosing the partners, we weren't also protect as one of the categories of partners, maybe saying, well, let's go and use, take the pastoralist associations and their members as one of those partners and look at it from their point of view. What do they see as innovations? Where do they see that they're innovating? And then look at it from that point of view as well.
Yeah.
I think these are all really helpful points, Mary, and this example about holes, yeah, just makes me think, and your comment about it really depends where you're standing resonates a lot for me in even different countries within East Africa. So it's an interesting thing to think about, and I'm starting to cook in my mind. I'm happy to have any collaborators on that. If there's some sort of grid, the framework we can have to get more precise about this, on how to integrate the where we are standing question. How is innovation defined based on where we are standing now, I think is really interesting, and also in terms of what recommendations can be made at the national level or local levels. is really important because those will vary by location. And then this example, Mary, you put in a chat as well about FMLR, which was scaled up by farmers well before anyone took note of it. I think this is kind of the example I was trying to get at with these pastoralist system innovations is, are there some that are happening really interesting that we can take notice of, and is that a good use of the innovation research facility to focus in on those as a priority? I think Maury, you're up next.
No, I think that Mary and everyone make really good points, but the one that really blew my mind was Steve's question of what is a SPARC add value. And I think that that's something that is a conversation that we need to have along lines without derailing the work, because also we might need to add another tension and that tension is to start with something, but by starting with something, it doesn't mean that we cannot then recalibrate and expand the breadth of the approach, and it's all related to resources, timescales. But I think that that question and how we can maybe focus SPARC on trying to be untapping what is happening, it might be something that will actually help us to position the program and differentiate it from other players, because you also know that the innovation technology sector, it tends to be as well crowded by certain players. And I think that that conversation should happen in parallel and maybe help us to define the next steps or wider steps, but at the same time, do not derail the work that it has been already narrow. So we need to manage those tensions, but we need to acknowledge as well that this is an interaction, and these discussions will help us to sharpen the direction of the program. And then I have a couple of silly examples as well, but they're anecdotal examples, so I'll leave it for another time for a coffee. Over to Sean, that also was raising his hand.
Thanks, Maury. John?
Yeah, no, this is really rich. I mean, what's clear to me is that we're not going to make everybody happy with how we approach this facility. Some of the innovations we choose to study are going to be too shiny, in sort of Steve's eyes and others, which I tend to agree with. Some are not going to be shiny enough, maybe in FCDO's eyes. Some are going to be not transferable enough, sort of too myopic on something that's small but not scalable. Something, we could look at the enabling environment for innovations, and that might be too fuzzy and not specific enough, not private sector-y enough. Whatever that is, we're going to get it wrong. So I think we came out with a criteria early on, which was like portfolio diversity, meaning like, let's grab a couple things in different geographies. Let's grab a couple different types of innovation, private sector, public sector led, a couple different methodologies. Fine, let's do something that's more formative, that's something that's more evaluative. And given where we're at right now, we kind of have like one, max two things to start with. So the question is, what Maury put is like, what do we start with? And then I guess my follow on is, does it really matter? Can we just grab something, run with it, see what gets traction? And if what we start with doesn't, we shift to another part of that portfolio, because we actually don't know right now within all of that. We have a bit of a sense, but we ask 5 different people in this group. We're going to get 5 different answers, and I just wanted to try to arm Chloe with as much either sort of yeah, I heard you all, I'm going to go this way anyway, or yeah, we trust you. Let's give some independence and make that the mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John.
Yeah,
I saw Mark quickly put his number 5 in as well. Oh, sorry, someone else was speaking.
Yeah, just a quick, that's exactly, John, I think we're completely aligned. I mean, I think we need to start somewhere, but it doesn't just, one other point I want to make is that the innovation facility is sort of this package that we've been working on, but going back to Steve's point about what's changed, what's interesting over 30 years, that can be done through a research intervention. And we should think about that as we design our next cluster of research. So that's a nice connection with innovation. It can be, you know, looking at different types of different ways of casting innovation. But I do agree, I think we need to start somewhere. And I don't think it really matters. Like, of course it matters, but it, you know, I think you've put together some really nice criteria. You know, we can all debate the criteria, but frankly, I think we should move forward on that. But then also think about what are other ways of maybe filling in some of the gaps on innovation through the research interventions, and start putting together concept notes around that. I mean, now's the time. So we can put together a note about, you know, looking backwards 30 years, what's changed in pastoral lives, pick a place, think about some methods to do that, and then put that in the pipeline for research for next year. And that'll be very rich for SPARC. And that might be, you know, working in parallel. That's probably how we're going to sort of figure out over the next 18 months. Oh, wow, here's the added value of SPARC. You know, we've got this kind of work, which is looking back at change. We've got this piece of work that's looking at something shiny. And then we start to cobble together our story. So anyways, just wanted to endorse your points, John. Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, just a very quick corollary and add-on to what John said, and I agree 100% and delighted to hear John speak in those terms of just get on with it. You know, you can't forecast where this will go and so on, and therefore let's walk down divergent paths and have a look how it goes on. Now, there's a very strategic point that arises with that, because Chloe, in your presentation, to my delight, you talked about failure. And of course, innovations are a bit like business startups. They have quite a high mortality rate. And even if you don't like the word failure or mortality, we can use the term dead ends. There are things that people do which are valuable in particular contexts, but you can see rather quickly that they're never going to work anywhere else. Now, given that we're going to follow some of these things, and occasionally, and quite often, we're going to butt up against a dead end where we'll say, this was interesting, but there really isn't a story to tell to the rest of the world here. We therefore need to be doing as many things as we can reasonably try and do, recognizing that quite a few of these things we'll work on them for a month or two and then say, well, that's not going to take us anywhere. So if we put all our eggs into one basket, strategically, we run a real risk of not getting anywhere at all. If we go for a much broader approach and quickly move lightly on our feet, then running into a few dead ends won't wipe us out. Yeah, we're going to find things that are interesting in the whole portfolio.
I'm curious, yeah, based on this discussion and this idea that we want to move forward, and I am conscious of what John said, that if we ask 5 people on this call, we might get 5 different answers. But I am curious, from this list, which side is it? This side? From this list that we have on the side, if there's one that jumps out as very exciting, or if there's one that you have come across in your other work on SPARC or in other projects that you feel like, if we were choosing 3 shiny things, not shiny in the sense, 3 interesting topics that give a good blend that we want to run ahead with to kick off before March next year, what your vote would be. So rather than discuss, maybe if people just want to take a couple of minutes to ponder that and just write it in the chat, then I can aggregate these ideas, these votes, and get back to everyone on what we're going forward. And so maybe we take just a couple minutes. You can look at these. So these were the 9 innovations that were shortlisted by the white paper. In the bottom box, you have the few that were initially proposed to move ahead with this year, primarily because the partners were ready to move. And then we have some additional ideas that have come up beyond the white paper in this other box. Sorry, I can't seem to, oh, there you go. that you're in this other box. So yeah, if you would vote, you can choose one, you can choose two. It's not a scientific vote, but what would you be excited about seeing the Innovation Research Facility do as we just get started? I'm curious, Mary Ellen, if there are particular pastoralist system innovation from the Sahel that you have on top of head that you could throw also into the chat, and we could follow up on them.
I don't know if I have an example of one. I don't know if I would know well enough what, you know, but I think what the point I was trying to make is that you could, in designing the research, have, you know, pastoralist organizations like RBM and you know, have those networks of pastoralists as, you know, within as research partners, so that you were picking up these innovations. What am I'm just trying to think if there's anything I can. Yeah, I'm not sure I can think of anything immediately. I don't know enough about, you know, what's actually happening in pastoralist areas. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I think the ones that have come up from East Africa, in case it helps jog memories, and I just called you out, I don't know who else on the call is in West Africa, but that we have new business models and pastoralist systems driven primarily by people of pastoralist backgrounds who now live in urban areas, have jobs in completely different sectors, but have money, and as passion projects, they invest in pastoralism in a way that is new and is changing the way things operate, whether that's them investing in pastoral herds in new ways, or hiring herders in new ways, or establishing dairy farms to serve a growing demand for fresh camel milk, or investing in fodder production, distribution, in ways that are driven by those pastoralist investors, if you will, rather than by development projects.
There have been quite a few attempts here, some more successful than others, to organise pastoralists and sell the milk to urban centres, which is an innovation here, even if it's not, doesn't appear to it from anybody from Europe. So there's one good example in Dakar. And then there's a number of much smaller things that have either worked, or some of them have worked, some of them have not worked, to actually try and meet that urban demand for fresh milk rather than imported powdered milk. And I mean, I think non-pastoralists, non-herders investing in livestock, that's happening. I mean, that's where people put their savings to some extent. Yeah. Including a lot of farmers. So, I mean, but that shift is not, that happened some time ago. Yeah. Recently. But meeting those urban markets, yeah, I would say there's innovation happening there. There's innovation perhaps happening in breeding, artificial insemination, there's and selection and breeds, that sort of thing. Vaccination, I don't know, no idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this framing it as innovation around meeting changing urban demand is very interesting, especially because we see this urbanization trend growing secondary cities all over pastoralist areas, and consumer behavior is changing, which is also changing production distribution. So I could see that as like an area in which we could dig deeper to find out what's happening, being really an interesting one. So I will pick up on Steve's recommendation to also be able to do this as homework, not only live in the session. If you're still thinking about it now, please do put into the chat. But I will send out a follow-up email to gather these ideas, and Maury, point well taken that there's some helpful people who are on the call that we work in that process. And this is why I think Carmen designed it to be this annual review of the white paper and the mapping, annual publication and an ongoing review. So this initial homework is a good way to start. And I was proposing as well that I could develop a sort of idea capture sheet, a shared Excel file hosted somewhere that people could plug in additional ideas as they bubble up in their mind. But if anyone has another way I could do that, that makes it easier on you and can help us to capture everything, feel free to send those ideas my way as well. But we definitely want to keep gathering this and make the most of everything the big SPARC team has to offer. I'm still reading through the comments. The fives, I think the next person raising their hand is Mark.
Thanks, Chloe. No, I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and all the really useful considered input. And I'm pleased with how this is shaping up, and I totally agree. I mean, I think one way to go about the next steps, and I sort of put, just to reiterate what I just wrote into the chat there, would be to share the recording. This is why we recorded this webinar, so that people not here could see it. And perhaps in your, when you send out and solicit solicit the homework, you know, sort of be clear on deadline, be clear on purpose, of course, and then maybe draw people's attention to this slide, because I think this is really where most of the initial ideas are captured. Probably you could be ready for some people to sort of introduce a whole other parallel set of ideas that we may not have discussed today. But I do think we need over the coming weeks, not months, weeks, really need to sort of narrow things down to 2 or 3 ideas that we're comfortable with and get going on this, because otherwise time will sort of slip past. And then just reminding everybody also that let us get some of these other ideas that are innovation analysis research. Let's get those into our next round of research. I think there's a terrific, of this list, I can see 2 or 3 that could evolve into some pretty solid our research streams under the innovation. So anyways, just a big thanks to you, to Carmen, to John, Christabel, for having done this work. It's really, really interesting, and I think is shaping up to be a really core component of the program. So kudos.
Thanks, Mark. And I think just to share this piece also with everyone on the call, Howard, our FCDO counterpart, is back from leave, I believe, mid-August, and we're planning to work with him to have a similar session, a bit more with a bit more of opinion from the SPARC side, late August or early September, where we do pitch these 3 ideas to them for approval to move ahead with. But if any idea is not selected for this year, we definitely want to capture all of them and then maybe come back to some of them in future years. So I'm not too worried about having a lot of brand new ideas. It just might not be prioritized right away. I saw John's hand raised as well.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. I was just going to ask the group, or maybe a subset as a follow-up, for suggestions on how to tailor this presentation for that FCDO Q&A session. I think, Chloe, I agree with you. Let's be a little bit more propositional. I don't think we want to kind of open this up and have people vote, but I think that there are things in here that we know are going to be flagged, so let's go ahead and preempt that. But Mark, Maury, Steve, you guys will, and others will know well. So please do weigh in with, how we might be able to tweak this. Thanks.
Pretty good. It's a pretty good presentation. I mean, I think being more propositional, I totally agree with you there, John. I think we don't want to go in with an open book. Otherwise, we might get crazy ideas coming from FCDO and then feel compelled to follow up on it. I'd rather us have a solid ground with what we're comfortable doing. That is the SPARC add value, but that'll take a bit more time. But we're almost there. Yeah,
I think the more we can dictate for this first round, the more likely we are to get it done, and then be able to absorb those other recommendations and thoughts in the future years revisions. I saw Maury's comment as well about saying that the SPARC footprint overall is shifting to East Africa in the coming year. I guess that's a question really also back to you guys of, should we make that the priority then for what we choose, or should we keep this balance between the regions?
I think there's an argument that says that you don't specialize regionally, because within regions, people tend to know what's going on. So if you're in Kenya, you probably know a bit about what's happening in all of the neighboring countries. But if in Senegal, somebody's doing something which is completely new and potentially valuable, your chances of knowing about that are pretty low. So I think there's a big argument for keeping geographically dispersed, because then we're going to pick up on things which will surprise us.
Yeah, and I know there's always very positive feedback from pastoralists in the other region about hearing what's happening in their counterpart region. Yeah. Given that we might not do many studies right away, I'm not. Yeah, Mark, do you have a thought about this? Should we keep it focused on East Africa?
I hate to be the person to pass this message on, because I hate this. The sad fact is that donors are driven by geographic priorities. It's just a matter of fact. FCDO are compelled to look at what their country offices are interested in, and it really is sort of an overriding factor. Much, in fact, to an extent, which is really, in my view, personal opinion, problematic. I think, practically speaking, If we were to go forward with in-depth research in Burkina Faso, much as I would think that that would be the most valuable thing we could shed light on, I just think we would be really queried by FCDO. So I think we have to just take a cue on that geographic priority. I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done, but I really, for me, it feels like the tail wagging the dog, but I think this is one tail that has to wag the dog, sadly. So yeah, I think we've got to pay attention to FCDO priorities, much as it pains me to say that, which is why I was hesitating to weigh in.
Good. And I see Maury had a suggestion that maybe we can frame it as learning from the Sahel to inform East Africa.
Absolutely.
If there's some, I think that would, in my mind right now, if we're really oriented around an innovator as a partner that we're working with on the project, then we would want to find a similar innovators in the Sahel to be able to do that similar enough. So I'd be keen to connect with our colleagues who work in the Sahel to do that if we go that direction. Taylor.
Yeah, just a point, I guess, on that, like East Africa versus West Africa. I think I agree with Steve's point in terms of there's definitely sensible and promising innovations that are going on in West Africa. So I think we should keep our broad scoping open to both regions, because there's going to be interesting innovations that might be really relevant to the Horn of Africa, East Africa. As Maury says, I think there could be appetite from FCDO to, if we frame it and rationalize that in this way, I think they would be open to it. But I'm also sensitive to Mark's point about FCDO's geographic focus being highly or heavily focused on East Africa. So we might want to balance in that first tranche of innovations that we do evaluative research on, that we have kind of a mix similar to what you kind of proposed below on Ebola and AfriScout, and then having a similar innovation with Modem in Burkina Faso. I think that balanced portfolio makes a lot of sense, but I definitely think our scanning of innovations and the homework that we ask people to do after this webinar of proposing innovations that we might want to include, or pastoralist organizations we might want to be working with. I think we want to keep that scouting really open so that we get all really great ideas, and we're not kind of narrowing ourselves too sharply so early on at the innovation landscape.
Great. So I'm conscious that we're running up to the end of our session today. I just want to invite anyone who hasn't had a chance to chime in yet. If you have any thoughts you've been mulling over sharing, it would be great to hear from you. And also, if anyone has thoughts that bubble up after this session, feel free to shoot me, Carmen, John, an email. And if you don't have everyone's contacts, Taylor will connect us all, I'm sure. And I would love to get that input, whether for the immediate projects that are being selected or for the evolving white paper and scoping. Great. John, do you have any final thoughts?
No, just thanks for everybody joining in this sort of like midsummer moment. It's really helpful to get a sounding board, so we look forward to more of it.
Awesome. Mark, any last points from your side?
No, just to thank you. That was great. And again, yeah, tough in the middle of the summer, but I'm really glad we did this. Some great input.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for the rich discussion. It's been great for me to hear it, and I look forward to mulling over it and coming back in the next round with you with some more refined frameworks. And I will send out that follow-up email with the homework, calling it homework in your honor, Steve, and also the recording. And look forward to hearing from you all. And happy to have a chat anytime. So feel free to reach out.
Great. Thanks, Chloe.
Thanks,
Good.
Chloe.
Thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
all.
Great to see you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.